I'm joined in the studio by my colleague Gasia Ohanes, who grew up in Aleppo. Tell me what the government is actually up against here.
Ben, this is the biggest threat that the Syrian government has faced in years, in fact, since 2016. The offensive is being led by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. They're an Islamist militant group. They're designated as a terrorist organization by the US, and they're being aided with different rebel groups. Many of them are backed by Turkey. And there's also different actors, which I won't go into. It's a very complex situation in northern Syria, but they are up against tens of thousands of fighters that are deployed. They've already taken control of multiple Syrian cities. You've mentioned Aleppo. That is the biggest city that they now control. It's a very tense situation. And the regime has tried to get reinforcements from Iran and Iraq, but they have been bombed on their way by a US-led coalition that was formed in order to fight terrorism, actually. So it's in a tough spot at the moment. So
this is a really tricky situation. Just explain really briefly, should people be welcoming this offensive or not?
Like I said, it is a complex situation. Yeah. And while some people have welcomed this offensive, it's mostly people who were expelled from the city of Aleppo, rebels who had to leave on buses. And they're saying, we left the city on buses and we've returned on tanks. So those people have embraced the offensive, but who is worried about it is actually minorities. Aleppo is a city that is home to many minorities. The biggest of them is the Kurds. There's 500,000 Kurds in Aleppo, more or less, that's an estimate, and about 30,000 Christians. So they are extremely worried. Kurdish fighters were deployed to Aleppo. Now they're thinking of withdrawing, but there's a lot of mistrust of these rebel groups. You know, I did mention there's a lot of extremist militants on the ground, and especially minorities are worried. But there's no safe way to evacuate at the moment.
And that complex mix of behind this offensive, does that have something to do with the timing, why this has taken so long to actually take place right now?
Yeah, so the conflict has been going on for more than 13 years now. And the reason that the rebels have been able to advance now is because Iran's proxy, Hezbollah, is extremely weakened because of its war from Lebanon with Israel. And so it was one of the major forces defending the Syrian government. And now they're gone, and Russia is preoccupied with its invasion of Ukraine. So it is kind of left alone at the moment, and it was a window of opportunity. And now they have a new trick up their sleeves, as some are saying. They have drones, they're called Shaheen drones, and it's the first time that the rebels are using air offensives against the Syrian government, and it seems to be working really well. They have released video footage of these drones in action, and they were used in Aleppo and taking control of the city. And the regime responded by withdrawing. We have not seen this before, this kind of fast withdrawal of regime forces, of Russian forces from the ground. That's why they've been able to advance really, really fast.
Gasia Ohanes with the analysis there. Thank you very much for the insights.
And for more, I'm joined here in the studio by Middle East expert Daniel Gerlach. Welcome, Daniel. Good to see you here.
Yeah, thank you.
We're hearing from the UN Special Envoy for Syria that these recent developments present a threat not only to the Syrian civilian population, but also to regional and international security. Can you tell us how you see this situation?
I think the envoy is right. The situation has been that of a protracted conflict for many years, and experts, myself included, have warned the political decision makers for many years that if that conflict is not addressed properly by the international community, it's going to explode again in our faces. And that's what we see now. We see further disintegration, we see an eruption of violence again. I don't think it's going to, this particular advance of the insurgents is going to change the equation, but of course other forces are getting involved. We see the Iranians, though they have been weakened, are getting involved. The Iraqi government has announced that they're going to send official paramilitary troops from Iraq to Syria to buttress the Syrian regime. We see the Russians get involved back in the game. So, this is going to lead to further violence.
OK, but let's talk about how all of this works, because, of course, Bashar al-Assad's ally, Russia, as you mentioned, is busy in Ukraine. Iran, as you mentioned, and its proxies have been fighting with Israel, weakened. Is that, if we talk about timing, is that why the rebels have moved on Aleppo now, and they're seemingly being very successful? Why is that?
That's the circumstances, and of course that's been factored in the calculation if this is the right time to move. But there's two other factors that I think are often overlooked. There have been constant shellings in the western countryside of Aleppo from regime forces. They were quite careless about it. They just occasionally kept the conflict ongoing, shelled villages under insurgent control, so the pressure to do something was there. On the other hand, Al-Julani, who's the leader of the infamous group Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, called the Liberation Front for Syria, an Islamist group that was controlling the emirate, was still controlling the emirate in Idlib, felt that they might be thrown under the bus by rapprochement between Turkey and Syria. So in order to make sure that they still have a ball in the game, they wanted to be proactive. They wanted to show their military strength and show that they haven't become irrelevant. And also, of course, he wanted to show to his own fighters that they're still a powerful military group. And if you are a military group, you have to wage war every now and then, every couple of years. And so they were quite, I think, impressed by their own success. Now, the question is, to what extent did the Turkish government allow this to happen, or to what extent was it itself a bit surprised by the success of the advance?
That's right, because the HTS group, which you're talking about, it's the leading rebel faction that's now taken Aleppo, as you said. It is considered one of the most powerful armed militias in northwestern Syria, and as you said, it is supported by Turkey. So can you go into more detail about what Turkey wants out of this?
I think what happened is Turkey was extremely discontent with the negotiations as they were going on with Bashar al-Assad's government. The regime was, as usual, quite arrogant, and you don't treat President Erdogan arrogantly. Erdogan was ready to normalize to a certain extent. Of course, there's the Kurdish file, there's the Syrian Democratic Forces in the northeast, which are still controlling the area, and Erdogan wants to deal with that. He saw that with Donald Trump elected, he might get some more legroom for action in Syria, for a more robust response. He wanted to teach a lesson to President Bashar al-Assad and tell him, you are not going to get my rapprochement for free. I can also harm you. Now, I think the Turkish government allowed the insurgents in Idlib to move forward towards Aleppo, but not inside the city. They said, OK, go ahead, deal with it, show your strength. We will back you up to a certain extent. But I don't think that the Turks wanted them to advance into Aleppo, to go into Hama, which is difficult to control because you cannot just say, we allow you to do this and not that. If they're moving forward, they're enthusiastic about it. But if you see the statement of the Turks, joint statement with Turkish and Iranian foreign minister today, they said, Syria should not be a place for international terrorists or for terrorist groups, I'm paraphrasing. And to what did they refer to in that statement? Did they just mention the Syrian Democratic Forces, the Kurdish groups in the northeast, or did they also refer to these insurgents? It's quite unclear.
OK. In terms of Turkey's end game, what is Turkey's goal? Is it getting rid of Assad?
Well, I don't think it can get rid of Assad at the moment. The question is if they consider Tahrir al-Sham, the group that is controlling Idlib and that's been under Turkish support and tutelage for a long time, if they are willing to sacrifice them for a proper normalization with Syria. That's the big question, because I think that's what Julani was very much afraid of. That was one of the geopolitical contexts why he acted the way he acted, in order to, let's say, destroy that process of normalization. Some people call it the 7th of October of Syria, what they were trying to do. But that's, I think, undecided yet. I think Erdogan has a long-term interest to normalize with the Syrian regime, but he wants to do that on his terms and not on Assad terms.
In terms of what is happening now on the ground in Syria, I mean, until recently, the war in Syria had relatively stable front lines, hadn't it? How do you see this conflict developing now?
Well, I think Russia is going to reinvest. Iran to a limited extent, because the Iranians need to be aware wherever they move with their forces, Israel will be striking them. So they will expose themselves. Now, the Iraqi government is taking a bit of that burden and saying, we are sending paramilitary groups in order to support the Syrian regime, because our troops hopefully are not going to be bombarded by the Israelis and certainly not by the Americans, who we consider an ally. So it's a very complicated situation. I think the regime of Assad is extremely weak, and people in the regime areas are very discontent with the situation, being forced to fight again to get back into the battle. So I think they will move forward. We are expecting a counteroffensive, but it's going to be a very costly one on both sides, and the outcome will be another unsolved Syria conflict.
Daniel Gerlach, thank you so much for your analysis. That's fascinating.
Thank you for inviting me.
Tanya Evans is the International Rescue Committee's director for Syria. She told me more about the scale of displacement triggered by the rebel offensive.
The situation in northern Syria was already dire prior to the current escalation that we're seeing. This sudden and large-scale escalation only risks further plummeting northern Syria into an even deeper humanitarian crisis. Before this escalation, there were a large number of people already in urgent need of humanitarian assistance. People living in displacement, in the videos that we've just seen, with humanitarian assistance unable to already meet the needs of these individuals. With the recent airstrikes, we're seeing that displacement is only further increasing, with estimates of around 20,000 people already being displaced from Aleppo, moving to other parts of the governorate, or moving into northeast Syria or into Idlib. We have heard reports of casualties and indeed fatalities. As is always the case, civilians are paying the hardest price, and women and children are greatly impacted by the situation.
So tell me more about those returning to parts of northern Syria after years of displacement, now that the rebels have gained control. Is it safe for them?
We're hearing at the moment reports of individuals returning to Aleppo, where they have family that they have not seen for many years. At the moment, our priority really is in ensuring the safety of our teams and of the people that we serve. As escalations continue, as displacement continues, and as fatalities and injuries are recorded, our priority is to ensure that we're able to provide humanitarian assistance. The IRC had to suspend operations on November 28th as escalations were rapidly increasing. We are slowly resuming some of our operations, as are other organizations, but not all health facilities at the moment are able to operate because it is just too risky.
Tanya Evans from the International Rescue Committee for Syria.